She quit a stable job with no backup plan. From the outside, it looked irresponsible, a decision people only make when something has already gone wrong. But the truth was quieter and far more deliberate. Stability is supposed to be the goal. A reliable paycheck, predictable hours, a role you can explain in one sentence. In today's world, those markers still define success for millions. Yet more professionals are discovering that stability doesn't always mean security. Sometimes it simply means staying comfortable while slowly losing yourself. There is a difference between a life that looks secure and a life that actually feels meaningful, and that gap, when it grows wide enough, becomes impossible to ignore. She had reached that gap, and she chose to step across it. To understand why she walked away without a safety net, we have to rewind a career that appeared ideal. She did everything right, built experience carefully, earned trust, became dependable, the kind of employee managers rely on and organizations quietly depend on. She was the person who stayed late without being asked, who solved problems before they became visible to anyone above her, who absorbed pressure so that others didn't have to. From every professional angle, she was succeeding, and yet success, as she was performing it, had begun to feel like a costume she wore to work each morning. But over time, the work narrowed. Days blended together. Creativity gave way to process. Initiative slowly turned into obligation. She wasn't failing. She was succeeding at something that no longer felt aligned. The goals she pursued belonged to the role, not to her. The milestones she hit were meaningful to her organization, but increasingly hollow when she held them up against what she actually cared about. That hollowness is quieter than failure. It doesn't sound an alarm. It simply grows, day by day, until it occupies more space than the work itself. The warning signs were subtle. Sunday evenings felt heavier. Small tasks felt draining. Motivation didn't disappear overnight. It eroded gradually, replaced by routine. And the more stable her role became, the harder it felt to imagine leaving it. Stability, she realized, has a gravitational pull. The longer you remain in it, the more it shapes your sense of what's possible. She had stayed long enough that leaving felt not just risky, but almost structurally impossible, as if the job and her identity had fused without her permission. Then clarity arrived unexpectedly, not as a crisis, not as burnout, but as a calm realization that staying would cost more than leaving, that the version of herself she was becoming no longer matched the life she wanted to build, and that waiting for certainty meant waiting forever. She understood, in a quiet and unwavering moment, that no perfect opportunity was going to arrive and rescue her from the decision she was avoiding. The decision itself was the first step. Everything else would have to follow from it. There was no backup plan, no guaranteed landing, just a growing understanding that some risks don't announce themselves loudly. They appear as comfort that quietly limits what's possible. The risk of leaving was visible. The risk of staying was invisible. But invisible risks compound just as surely. And once she saw that truth, she couldn't unsee it. The moment she resigned, the noise rushed in. Concerned messages, raised eyebrows, gentle warnings framed as advice. Without the structure of a job, time felt different. Days stretched. Mornings lost their urgency. For the first time in years, her calendar was empty, and that freedom, which once felt liberating, quickly became unsettling. Without deadlines, doubt filled the space. Questions followed her everywhere. What now? How long would savings last? Had she mistaken clarity for courage? Friends asked what she was working on. She answered carefully, avoiding the truth that she didn't fully know yet. That not knowing felt acceptable to her, even necessary. But it was harder to explain to people who measured progress by titles and outputs. Her honesty about uncertainty was often received as evasiveness. It wasn't. The absence of a plan exposed something deeper. Her identity had been built around productivity, around being needed, around measurable contribution. Without those signals, self-worth felt fragile. Silence replaced feedback, and that silence was uncomfortable. She hadn't realized how much of her confidence had been borrowed from external validation until that validation was no longer available. Still, She resisted the urge to rush. She explored ideas without committing, took short projects, learned new skills, revisited interests she had postponed for years. Some days felt productive, others felt aimless. Progress wasn't linear, it was exploratory. And exploration, by its nature, doesn't always produce visible results. It produces internal ones. There were moments of panic, late nights spent calculating expenses, moments when job listings felt tempting again. Familiar titles whispered reassurance, but returning too quickly felt like undoing the very reason she left. She recognized that fear was trying to dress itself as practicality. Gradually, patterns emerged. She noticed what energized her and what drained her. She began connecting ideas instead of chasing roles. The absence of structure forced self-trust. Decisions came from curiosity, not obligation. She started making choices based on what she wanted to build rather than what others expected her to pursue. Leaving without a backup plan didn't create chaos. It created space. And in that space, something unexpected started forming. The shift didn't announce itself loudly. It revealed itself through consistency. What began as exploration slowly turned into direction. One small project led to another. Conversations became collaborations. Skills she once treated as secondary started connecting into something coherent. For the first time, her work felt self-directed instead of assigned. She wasn't executing someone else's strategy. She was building her own, imperfectly and iteratively, but with genuine ownership over each decision. That ownership changed how effort felt. It no longer depleted her, but uncertainty never fully left. Income was irregular. Momentum felt fragile. Some weeks brought progress. Others brought silence. And without a company name to hide behind, every outcome felt personal. Success felt earned. Failure felt exposed. There was nowhere to deflect responsibility. No systems to blame. No hierarchy to absorb the variance. Everything that happened because of choices she made. Then came the internal conflict. Structure was gone, but discipline was required. Freedom demanded responsibility. Without a manager, she had to become her own, setting boundaries, defining standards, deciding when enough was enough. The independence she wanted now required the maturity to sustain it. She discovered that self-direction is a skill, not a trait. It has to be practiced. It breaks down when pressure rises and has to be rebuilt deliberately. There were moments she questioned everything. When isolation felt heavier than stress ever had. When clarity blurred and comparison crept in. Former co-workers advanced steadily. Their paths looked linear, predictable, safe. LinkedIn became a minefield of milestones she wasn't hitting. Titles she didn't hold. Companies that looked stable from a distance. Hers did not look like theirs. But slowly, something stronger replaced doubt. Confidence rooted in capability, not validation. She wasn't chasing permission anymore. She was building something that reflected who she was becoming, not who she had been. The scaffolding of her old identity had come down. The fear of not having a backup plan transformed. It stopped feeling reckless. It started feeling honest, because for the first time, her effort aligned with intention. She was no longer spending energy maintaining a version of herself that didn't fit, and that alignment made the uncertainty worth enduring. Yet the real test still waited ahead, because believing in a direction is easier than committing to it when everything is on the line. The breakthrough didn't arrive as a single moment. It arrived as sustainability. Work became steadier. Referrals replaced cold outreach. Projects overlapped instead of disappearing. What once felt fragile now felt repeatable. She wasn't improvising anymore. She was operating with intention. Systems she had built slowly started producing results without constant intervention. The fear that once dominated her decisions softened. Not because risk vanished, but because competence grew. She had learned how to adapt, how to recover, how to build momentum without certainty. And that skill became more valuable than any backup plan she could have designed. Adaptability cannot be planned in advance. It is built through the experience of navigating uncertainty without collapsing. Looking back, quitting without a plan wasn't escape. It was a confrontation with fear, with identity, with the question of who she wanted to become when no one was directing her path. Stability hadn't protected her. It had delayed that question. And questions delayed long enough don't disappear. Her story reflects a larger shift happening quietly across careers today. Traditional safety nets feel less reliable. Linear paths feel less relevant. And more people are realizing that resilience matters more than predictability. The ability to rebuild, to redirect, to withstand uncertainty without losing direction. That is the new form of career security. Not a title, not a tenure. Not everyone should quit without a plan. But everyone eventually faces a moment where clarity arrives before certainty. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. She